Good morning, everybody. I'm going to invite Kristen. So give us just a second to get things going here. And let's see if she accepts this. All right, we're just waiting for Kristen here. So I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm going to, let me just got my computer screen going on at the same time, so I'm going to try to refresh here. Let's see. Hello, Amy. We're waiting on Kristen here, so just give us a second or two. This takes a few minutes for us to bring somebody else online. So we'll get here in a second. I think it's just now 10, so hope you're doing okay. How do I pop on? Okay, Kristen, hang on a second. I am. Yes, you want to be on my video? I'm approving you.
Hey! Can you hear me? Can you see me? Oh wait. Can you hear me? Can you see me? All of a sudden I cannot hear you now. That's so crazy.
Can you hear me now?
Oh wait. Now I can.
All right. Well, that was good. I tried to use my headset, but I guess it's not going through when I do a Facebook Live. I don't know. Go figure. So, yay! Kristen and Dawn we're in the house. Like, maybe I should turn my screen so I'm not so small. Hang on. Well, I guess this is okay. What do you think? Yeah.
I mean, we could turn it sideways. I would have to turn my phone sideways.
Let me see if it will.
I could do that.
Hang on a second.
Hi, everybody who's joined.
Nah,
thank you for joining us.
We'll just leave it here.
It's gonna be awesome.
I'll kind of go to the side a little bit here, so we can see you good. Yeah, thank you for joining us, guys. We have a lot to talk about today. Kristen and I were talking. We've been talking about life. Good morning, Nancy. Good morning, Suzanne. We've been talking a lot about life. Hi, Margie and Terry.
Hey, Linda.
And I guess some of the things that we've discovered is we all go through loss and many times throughout our years. Loss can be a death. It could be loss of food, a divorce, a friend,
a job,
a family member that you fought with and they're gone out of your life. And I looked up just the very simple raw definition of loss, and it really is just losing something or someone. I mean, it's something or someone. That's really big. I mean, and it's very broad, losing someone or something. So Kristen and I really just wanted to get on and talk about loss, talk about personally how it's affected us, and then the grieving process, because the grieving process is so important. And it's also one of the hardest things. And Kristen, I know I had briefed you on a few things, but I've got some links I'm going to throw in on here when we get to that point. I found some really good articles that I think will help people as well. And
I have a couple that I found as well.
Wouldn't it be funny if we found the same one?
Oh my gosh. Well, I found one because I was specifically targeting overeating as one of the things that happens, and I don't if it's okay if I jump right in. One of the things that I have seen is people are either in two camps. Either people stop eating, like because they're just so overwhelmed by the grief, or they are in the opposite camp where they're overeating. And again, I have an article that talks about it, because when we eat, especially sugar and fat, our brain releases the chemical dopamine, which increases our well-being. It's like that happy hormone. So when we eat food, it's like we can't get enough after like that loss, because we're trying to not erase, but deal with what's happened. So people either fall in two camps. Either they're not eating at all, or very little, or they have a very hard time eating, or they're overeating. And and they're gaining.
Yeah, absolutely. So I found something that was really cool. It was about the reactions to loss. And
Yes.
I didn't really, I mean, I think of reactions as, you know, crying, turning to food, perhaps binge eating. Um, there's so many things. And I was like, I'm going to read these guys. If you fall into one of these if any of this stuff happens, you need to tune in and listen to this. So reactions of a loss can be physical and psychological. It's not uncommon to experience periods of intense distress and feeling such as, but not limited to,
Right.
longing, crying, dreaming of your loved one, anger, denial, sadness, despair, insomnia, fatigue, guilt, loss of
Yep.
interest, confusion, and disorganization, disbelief, inability to concentrate, preoccupation with thoughts of your loved one, or it could be thoughts of food or anything else. Fleeting hallucinatory experiences. That was a new one to me. I didn't think about hallucinating.
Yeah.
Meaningless withdrawal, avoidance, overreacting, numbness. I felt that. Relief, sadness, yearning, fear, shame, loneliness, helplessness, hopelessness, emptiness, loss of appetite, and weight gain. So that's not a limited list. That's a pretty big list of
No, it's a
reactions
pretty extensive.
when we don't deal with our loss and and deal with grief.
So I'm going to step away from the food part real quick and just talk about the grief, because I see a lot of clients who come in my office for grief. So one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that, first of all, a lot of people don't know how to talk to someone who's grieving.
Yeah.
Likewise, the person who's dealing with the grief doesn't know how to respond to other people who want to kind of console them. So it's this, everybody's like walking on eggshells. Nobody knows what to say or what to do. And in my experience, the person who's dealing with the grief a lot of time will say, I'm sorry for crying or for feeling what they're feeling. And of course, the people on the outside are like, oh no, don't be sorry, you're the one who's going through this, like you lost your dad, or you lost your dog, or you lost your sister or your daughter, or whoever it is, you've lost this person, or you've lost whatever it is. And yet the person who's experiencing it a lot of times will say, I'm sorry, because an over expression of emotion in our culture is difficult for people to deal with. And so we've got to address dealing with emotions.
Yeah.
Like, of course you're going to go through this. Of course there are going to be tears. Of course you're going to have an overwhelming emotion. Yeah. And Gail says there are never the right words. There are never the right words. I'm sorry. What can I do? And then it's, in these experiences, I think a lot of times people also feel guilt, like, oh, I don't want to overstep. I don't want to ask for help, especially in this community where people have trouble asking for help anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's another piece of this that's got to be addressed, is it's okay to be grieving. And what we want to shift to is working on the self-care in this process, because that's very instrumental. That's what's going to help people heal. And I know there may be people who say, oh, I don't want to heal, I want to go through this. Yes, you're going to go through this, but in a healthy way.
Right.
In a healthy way.
So I just posted, there was a great article, and you hit the first one perfectly. It's a great article on the Huffington Post from years ago, and it was the 7 steps for dealing with loss and grief. And the first one, which you just talked about, was acknowledgement and acceptance of feelings. Because you have to be able to say, it's okay for me to be going through this. I'll share that, I have my parents. My parents haven't passed on. I cannot even imagine what it's going to be like when I lose my parents. So I can't say I understand when someone loses their parents, because I truly don't. And I've not been there. I've lost my grandparents, and that my grandmother I think my grandmother, losing her was like losing a parent. I lost my best friend, someone I knew longer than B. We met in the mid 80s, shortly after I graduated school. And she died of colon cancer. And oh my gosh, she rocked my world. I mean, we got each other and we talked every single day. And there are times that I'm driving my car and I want to pick up the phone because her daughter purposely left her voicemail and her phone connected so she could hear her mom answer the phone, even though it's voicemail. And so I get that. And dealing with that loss was very, very difficult. And I had to first accept the fact that it's okay for me to feel the way I feel. It was really hard. And I know B's not going to mind me sharing this, but B had a child when she was very young. He was born in July and he passed away 6 months later of SIDS. There are no reasons for that. He died just before Christmas. And I can't imagine going through that. But I will say that she had to acknowledge that it was okay for her to feel the way she felt. And she went through this, I spent years with her, and he'd be in his 30s now. Actually, I think he'd be in his probably maybe closer to 40s now. And, this July just passed around again on the 28th. And, she posted a picture of him. So you don't ever lose that. You just acknowledge that it's okay to feel the way you feel. And I like what Henry Nouwen had to say, because when you talked about friends not knowing what to say, Henry Nouwen, who I love, said, "A friend who can be silent with us in the moment of despair or confusion, who can stay with us in the hour of grief and bereavement, who can tolerate not knowing, not healing, not curing. That is correct. That is the friend who cares." Just someone to sit with you in that silence. So what are your thoughts on that? And then we'll kind of talk about step 2 that I have.
Well, I think that is it. I think that so many people are looking for the right words, and there are no words.
Yeah.
Like there just aren't. And I think that quote right there nails it, because when you were talking, you were saying it, all I could think of is, somebody sitting with you, like holding your hand. And I think during this time, the power of physical touch is really potent. And
I'm touching all of you guys.
Yeah, the power of physical touch is very potent, because that quote hits it. We don't need to say anything. We just need to be there. And sometimes, because it's uncomfortable to ask for help, sometimes we need those pushy friends and family members that just say, "I'm bringing a meal over." Yeah. Like, no, you don't get to object. Like, I'm going to be there. Or I'm going to come and sit with you.
You just show up with the meal.
You just show up.
Like, you can ring the doorbell and leave and go, "I want you to know it's on your doorstep." Because if you're like me, I'll say no. And I did say no to my prayer group who wanted to help me because, I battled, of course, the loss of my health and the loss of being able to do certain things. And they just showed up once a week, and it's hard. So, if you want to do something, hold their hand and just show up. Just be there in that moment.
Yeah. And it's not that you need the right words. It's just the act of being there and saying, I care, and the act of allowing people to be there and to know, because this is kind of like your darkest hour when you're going through something like this, and you just know. And it's the calls. And also the other thing I want to share is, because my dad passed away last year in 2017, and for the first month, I had a lot of friends who reached out to me and who were like, "Are you okay? Just want to check on you." And I appreciated them, but I also didn't want to talk. Like, I am, even though I'm a talker, like, this is what I do for work. Sometimes I process differently. Sometimes I'll process and I'll talk about it. And then there are other times where I'll journal, or I'll just kind of be in that quiet communion, so to speak, where I'm just processing. And so I didn't want to talk to anybody because I didn't really have anything to talk about, because it was just going to be like the rehashing. So for me, it was like what we were talking about, the silence, where if somebody wanted to come over and hang out, fine, but it was you know, they would just be sitting there staring at me. Like I didn't want to talk. And so that's the other thing is knowing, which it's a fine line, knowing who your loved one is or your friend or whatever. Are they going to be the one who's going to need to communicate? Are you just going to be sitting there in silent communion? You know, how do they process? Because each person will process differently. And it's interesting because I've worked with families where none of them talk about it. None of them talk about the person who's passed. Like I have a client who's 2 years post, you know, the death of her mother, and none of them talk about it. Like it's yeah, she's still there and they have pictures of her, but it's like, how is, you know, your brother,
you can't close the door on someone who's been with you your whole life and go, okay, they're gone now, boom. I mean,
no, but it's nobody talks about her past.
Yeah.
Like they talk about her, but it's because, again, so many people are afraid of dealing with the emotions or afraid of what the emotions are going to come up. And then, you know, there's ego at play and all of these other things. It's just it's a difficult thing. So, and it's uncomfortable. So the thing that I hear most often from people is it's awkward, it's uncomfortable, and I don't know how to talk to this person. And it's like, okay, so there are no perfect words. It's just allowing it to be what it is. And all of those words that you were talking about, I think initially people are dealing with the shock. And I mean, I can take another tangent on this because there's the body system, there's the fight flight, there's your body, the acute stress, you know, the ongoing cortisol for the first coming months, you know, a couple months that are getting flooded into your system. There's another article that I can share about the body's physical response that I thought was really, your heart pumps blood differently, your adrenal glands, your immune system changes, your brain, there's even some change. It says for an estimated 7 to 10% of people who lose someone, grief doesn't ease over time. That's a pretty big number. But then your body's slower stress responder takes the lead when everyday issues arise. So the normal stress seems to linger, which then affects your overall stress response and can cause inflammation. So I thought that was pretty interesting to know, that there is a biological, physical response to grief. I
like that, you know, you just said that grief doesn't ease over time, because that really leads you to, you know, to step 2 in here, which is start taking the steps to fill the void within. You know, we've got to fill that void somehow. You know, so step 1 is we accept and acknowledge the feeling. Step 2 is, how do we fill that void, and what do we fill it with? And obviously we don't want to fill it with food. So
right. Well, I think what's important is, you know, the thought is when you say fill the void, immediately what comes to mind is nobody is ever going to replace that person or that, you know, situation, or, you know, because it's not just people. Like I have another client right now who's struggling with the impending loss of her dog. And so there are some people, like, dogs are family members too. You have a little, you know.
You all know, so, I have one.
Right. So it's it's parents, it's siblings, it's a husband or a wife, it's a children, it's, you know, your puppy dogs, your kitties, right? So it's a job, it's all of those things that you talked about. And I think, somebody just, Suzanne, sometimes you're going to throw the stuff like taking care of wills, homes, physical stuff. It takes a year longer for your brain realizes that you can grieve. So that's true too. So there's all of those things, which in the initial phases may keep people busy, right? So they're not necessarily dealing with it up front. When you're talking about filling the time, you know, there's the 5 stages of grief, right? So there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the acceptance is not accepting the loss in the way that we think about it, but it's really actually stepping into the new normal. So when you're talking about filling the void, sometimes filling the void is the now what am I doing now? And so for the person who's bereaving, they can also have survivor's guilt, even though it's not necessarily a catastrophe or anything, but it's like, who am I to go, go on a trip? Who am I to go color in a coloring book? Like, John's not here anymore. How could I possibly do that? So there are these psychological changes that take place. Like, I'm not supposed to be having a good time. I have a client who, about a year ago, after her mother passed, she was really having a hard time going out and having fun. And when we talked about it in session, one of the things she said is, she's not here anymore. She's not allowed to have fun. So what gives me the right to have fun? So these are things that psychologically people are going through when they're bereaving. And so it's a sensitive thing to say, yes, you've got to do something, but sometimes that doing something may be that they're allowing themselves to feel those feelings, because again, there's a couple different camps. There are the people who totally avoid the feelings, and they're dealing with the things that Suzanne was talking about, like taking care of the wills, taking care of the house, taking care of all these other things to keep their mind away from the actual bereavement process. And then there are others who get into that depression, and it's a situational depression, earlier rather than later, because they cannot imagine their life any differently.
Yeah. And that kind of brings you to step 3 on here, was learn to grow from the loss. We've acknowledged, we accepted, we start to kind of fill those areas. You can't replace them, but you do things now that maybe you didn't do before. And then how do you grow from the experience? What do you learn from it? And then the next thing is replace the negative feelings with positive ones. For some people, that loss is very negative. How do you turn that around? And what do you do to find that void? How do you get yourself out of that funk?
So the first one that you talked about, which is, how to grow from it, is, and it's both of them are kind of in tandem. So how did this person or puppy or this situation, let's say it was a job or whatever, how did that grow you?
Yeah.
So starting to look at the positives that person brought into your life, which that's going to bring out some grieving as well. And also saying, how can I search for greater meaning in the loss? Where can I take this and shift it? Now, this is going to sound really morbid and awful, but do you remember John Walsh?
Yeah.
And Adam Walsh? Yeah. So I happened to read something that popped up last week, but he had turned his greatest, most horrific loss into, which is now, I believe it's the National Center for Exploited and Missing Children. And not everybody's going to go out and create a nonprofit, with a loss, but what it could be is that you throw yourself into volunteering at the animal shelter, or you throw yourself into doing something that you've always wanted to do. And you're like, oh my gosh, my husband's not here. I'm going to go on this trip. Or, my dad always wanted to go on this trip. I'm going to go on it without him. Or, I'm going to do this in honor of that person, but it's for you. So it's helping your soul grow. It's helping you grow. Or, you know what? It's also at the time when we realize that life is short. So what have you been putting off that it's time for you to take hold of and say, no, my time is now. My time is now, because tomorrow is not
promised
given to any of us. It's not promised to any of us. Yeah. And then turning the negative into the positive, it's remembering the good times, turning on, if you have family tapes or something like that, or a picture that you put on your desk, and yes, it'll make you cry, but it'll give you a happy cry. Like when you remember when someone did something that was hilarious, you're going to cry because they're no longer here. And then you're going to laugh because in that moment, that person brought you joy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I have a Pandora bracelet, and I love my Pandora, and people always comment on it, and I say, they go, do you just like these things? I'm like, yeah, I love them, but every single one of them was either a gift or it was something on here that I bought in remembrance or because of somebody else. I have a butterfly on here because my grandmother always told me she'd come back to, whenever I saw a yellow butterfly, you know, it would be her, you know, just to remind me of her. And I see them all of a sudden, like when I'm feeling bad or
Oh,
down,
wow.
or all of a sudden one just pops up and it's like, okay, I can get through this, you know, because this just flew by,
Yeah.
you know. And the other one is an angel. I was talking about my friend Cassandra. So, you know, there's an angel on here. Whenever I'm feeling like things couldn't get any worse, I just kind of flip through this and go, oh, okay, there's the angel. Oh, there's the turtle about my friend Meredith, who's like strong and steady, you know. And I just keep going
Right.
through, and I'm like, okay, I got this, you know. And that's why I bought those shirts. I say I got this on it, and that we're stronger than we think, because we are so
Right.
much stronger than we think we are. You know, I posted a quote a second ago up online here. It's death is not the greatest loss in life. The greatest loss is what dies inside of us while we live. So the question
Mm-hmm.
is, how do we not let their feelings and their emotions, how do we not let all this die inside of us? Because it's okay to be joyous, or it's okay to grieve, I should say. But we want
Right.
things to live, but we ourselves start to die, and we
Right.
fall back into, and we fall back in sometimes the darkest areas. um, and it's not the end. And many of us who are weight loss surgery patients, who are that statistic, that person who was abused, that person who was sexually abused, that person who may be being physically beaten or abused or verbally abused, that's kind of a loss too, because it's a loss of a quality of life. It's a loss. It's a
Mm-hmm.
loss of, um, you know, maybe your spouse is doing something to you, you know, and it's a loss of what that relationship used to be. And part of
Right.
us dies when we feel that. But how do we overcome that? And I've seen where you know, I'm proud that I've overcome so many things, but I've seen the
Mm-hmm.
opposite in other people who've gone through the same exact thing I have, where all of a sudden they've become addicted or they fall into those traps. And it's what we
Right.
do, and how we fill our voids. And you know, I found places to fill my void with my animal, with my family, with my, you know,
Right.
with my church, and my close friends in this community. And we have to be able to find those people that we trust when we sometimes don't
Right.
know what to say, because it's hard and we don't know what to say sometimes. So that kind of goes into step 5, which is feeling liberated to move forward. How do we move
Right.
forward? How do we take everything we've got, take that ball of energy that we need, finding it in something in order for us to move forward? So what are your thoughts on
One.
moving forward, and how we do that?
So many, it's like that little graphic on success. People think it looks like this and it's like a straight
Yeah.
line, but it actually looks like this and it's like a little scribbly line. It's the truth is, how do you move forward? One
At
step
a
at a
time.
time.
Yeah.
One day at a time. Going through things step by step, day by day, because we want to jump to the end. We want to jump, but it's similar in terms of the weight loss process too. We want to jump to goal weight. We want to jump to goal weight. We want to jump to, you know, everything is awesome again, and you know, we're past this. We've grown from it, and nobody wants to go through the messy middle. And I get it. I'm there with you. I mean, I don't think any of us want to go through it, but that's part of the process. And it's so cliche, but it's so much more the journey than it is the destination. Because if you're not embracing the journey itself, you'll never really get to the destination, because the destination is where it's a culmination of the journey. So it's really embracing the journey on a step by step, and every single day saying, what can I do to live to the very fullest today? What can I do to be my very best today? What can I do to be kind to myself and others today? What can I do that shows my self-love, that sets healthy boundaries with other people, that is who I want to be
Mm-hmm.
today? And it's a lot less doing and a lot more being. Who am I being today? Which is a shift, because so many people are like, okay, what do I need to do? All right,
Yeah.
checklist, checklist.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it's not always that. It's who are you being?
Yeah. So Amy wrote something nice on here. She said, what helps me out about my aunt is how strong and loving she was, and remembering all the memories I have with her. And she knows that she's with her. And I think remembering
Right.
those memories is great. You know, when we lose a loved one, that helps us through so many times. But then I take it kind of like how we can take what she just said and put it towards our journey and our weight loss journey for many of us, because so many people start to gain confidence as they're losing weight, but then all of a sudden, somewhere in the middle of their journey, no different than, experiencing the loss of a death one,
Right.
somewhere in the middle of a journey, things shift and things change. And I can say that, yeah, I'm excited and I'm a pretty confident person. However, I made the comment the other day to Bea that I said, I almost felt more confident sometimes when I was at my heavier weight, because I have so much excess skin now, and I feel that loss of who I used to be versus who I am today, and learning to accept, okay, this is who I am today. And you know what? I may hate wearing shorts now because I've got a lot, but how do we get past that? And I've got to allow myself to feel that way, because I know if I don't feel that way, then I'll just drive myself crazy. But filling that void with something else, trying to be positive, trying to go out and do things like this broadcast today, because again, so many times we just throw things under the rug and we think, okay, it's my family doesn't want to see me cry, so I'm just going to close my door and I'm going to cry in my room and cry alone. And I read something that I forgot who it was from. You guys could probably all look it up and figure it out. But it was, the person who usually smiles the most is the person who is got the most tears and who's crying the most inside, that no one ever sees. And I'm like, wow, how true.
You know who's the epic example of that?
Don't say me, because that's probably true.
No, Robin Williams.
Yes. Yeah.
None of us really knew. I mean, he was a star, but like none of us really knew the pain that was behind that. And so a lot of people, when they're like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine that person would have committed suicide. Like when Anthony Bourdain committed suicide, I was in shock, because it's the person who externally is like, I'm good. And, it's so true. And so that's something that, when those people are really struggling, I think there's even more guilt there.
Yeah.
And the reason I know this is because I kind of tend to be one of those people that, when I'm struggling, right, I kind of go inward and I pull back, instead of, pushing outward and posting it. Like, I'm not somebody who's, outwardly like, hey, life's a shit show today. Like, it's,
guess what happened to me today?
Right. Guess what happened to me today? But it's like, I'll pull back. Yeah. So like, that's what I do. But I also know that other people do that. And it's because they're always the happy person. And so when they're having a rough day, I've noticed where it's not that we're not allowed to have a rough day, but I think that when, especially like Robin Williams was a comedian and Anthony Bourdain was like an entertainer of sorts, when your job is to kind of entertain others, or when your livelihood is dependent on you putting on a show, and that's not me, but
wait a minute,
when you're doing
you
that,
say it's not you, but it's all of us leaders in the community.
It's all of us,
because you, myself, and everyone else who runs a corporation, who is in charge. I mean, this is not just our job for you and I to be doing this now, because this has nothing to do with shapewear, and it may has a little bit to do with what you are, because you're in the psyche valve therapist, mindset, frame of mind. But it has everything to do with who we are, because people, they have expectations of us when we come on here. Now, a lot of people in some of these groups know that we are just real, but my job, I feel, and my passion is continuing to make people feel confident and happy, right, and smiling, and I want to inspire people. And I could be trying to inspire people and talk to people and be as energetic as you see me now, but I could have had the absolute worst 2 hours prior to me coming on here where I was crying my eyes out. Okay, now that didn't happen this morning, but it's happened many, many mornings. I've come on here and people are like, oh, you're so happy. And I'm like, if you'd have seen me 5 minutes ago, I was a blubbering mess.
Hey, I cried this morning because I put my son on the bus and I was hysterical because he's 5 and he was like, I want to ride the bus. And I was like, I was a blubbering mess. And that was probably at 6:30 this morning. But that was him being little Mr. Independent and me going, I'm not ready.
Losses, we define loss, losing something or someone. For you putting someone on the bus, you know, you've lost them temporarily, and
I
but
know.
I can't imagine, people who have continued to lose, have that physical loss, versus the emotional loss. And it's so difficult. I mean, for me to go through a couple, I'm just like, okay, I get it. I know. And I feel like I have to prepare myself for down the road, whether it's my parents or whether it's my siblings. I've recently lost, um, for our high school, I'm in charge of the,
Thank you, Amy.
For our high school, I'm in charge of the alumni page, which lists
Right.
all of the folks who have passed away. And there was someone who passed away recently, one of our alumni, who battled cancer for 16 years. She was the epitome of what being a fighter is. And there were over 1,000 people that were at her memorial service.
Wow.
And I get goosebumps right now just talking about it, because she touched so many people. And yet her family knew this was coming and there was time to prepare. What happens with that loss when you're not prepared? What happens when we talked about earlier about all of a sudden a suicide or a drug overdose, or where you don't have time to prepare? I mean, I'm preparing that, my parents are getting older, but what if someone were to pass away suddenly? I mean, it hits. Wow. I mean, I have no words.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, and I've seen people that we don't get a choice, right? It just happens. And so I would say that the shock is greater, the denial is greater. There's no way to ever really prepare. And last year when I was at OH and I gave a talk on motivation, this woman came up to me and she said, because it was a lot about prepping and planning, and because motivation comes from within. But the piece that she said was that she had been struggling with taking care of her ailing mother for like 6 months, and her mother had since passed, but that during that 6 months she was so focused on her mother and the impending loss that she didn't take care of herself. And so that was huge. So whereas if someone just loses someone out of the blue, is there a difference? It really, these are all case by case situations, case by case basis. Is the loss any greater? It's more an individual thing. There are people who the loss is greater when it takes 6 months or a year. There are people that the loss is greater when it just happened, arbitrarily. There's no way to judge or measure that. It is what it is, and different people handle grief and loss differently. I think that suicide in general is really a difficult topic, because there's no way to quantify it or to qualify it, because there may be someone who loses someone and they deal with it and the pain isn't as great as in a different situation. So it's really hard to say. And Mary posts, I've lost several people in my life, including my father, but my greatest loss was my stillborn son. Like, that is something that is another great loss, that there's no way to understand or explain. Like, a lot of times I'll see people who want to understand, why did this happen? How did this happen? And there's sometimes no rhyme or reason for it. Just was. I think the other piece is people who've lost people to violent crime.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, we could go on and on and on about this, because sometimes the how for some people is greater of a pain than the fact that it happened. Is cancer any different from suicide, from any different from, I mean, it's a loss, but sometimes the how causes greater pain to individuals because it's difficult to wrap your mind around.
Yeah. I think that's where you find, which is the last step on and what I have here, is start evaluating your faith. I think there's a lot of questions. I think people at this point in time, I know people who've experienced a loss of a child, And I know of a friend in particular, a couple of years ago, there was a service at our mass. And while she still goes to church, her family members refuse to go to church anymore, because they feel like this is God's fault. There's that blame there. It's like, he never should have done it. Why did he do this? And I think it's important for us to know that, we don't have the answers. And we just have to have faith that there were reasons. Right. We don't know what the struggles that child could have faced years from now.
Right.
We just don't have those answers.
Well, and that's the faith and the trust in something bigger than ourselves. Yeah. And when we're able to lean into that, and so that's something that I'll share with people too, is, regardless of whatever your spiritual or religious beliefs are, you've got to lean into something, whatever that may be, because that's part of the bigger picture, right? Because these things are not things that the human brain can understand. Right. And so it's through love. And I strongly kind of believe in the foundation of fear over love. Are we giving into our fears, or are we giving into love?
Dark versus light.
Right. Dark versus light. And so leaning into love and knowing that there may not be an answer, but right, sometimes loss happens to teach those left behind a lesson. Yeah. So it's leaning into the faith. It's leaning into trust.
Yeah.
And it's scary, because we're attached. And it's interesting, because I was reading something, and it actually came from a Buddhist philosophy. I'm not Buddhist, but it said that our greatest sadness comes from our attachment. Yeah. So when we're able to detach, we're able to release it. And so what is so powerful about that is that when it comes to that, when you look at all of your loved ones, you're attached, right? And so just because I'm talking about it from a Buddhist philosophy, like if you detach, if you give it to God, right? So it's the same thought, just different terminology. If you're able to detach and let go, then you can find yourself more at peace. But that's the thing, is we're so attached to not just our loved ones, but not losing, right? That when we're able to kind of let go a little bit, and, there's that phrase, let go and let God, then that's where we actually embrace and are more empowered than disempowered.
Yeah. And it's not an easy process. And so many people have talked to me about their loss and the loss of the loved one, and where was God? And I'm like, he's been right there. He's continues to hold your hand. He continues to hold your hand, but sometimes we're not there yet. We're not there to feel yet. And it could be years. Right. It might take 20, 30 years before you start to understand. And for some people, they may not ever understand. And but I would say you've got to find something to hold on to, something to grasp. We talk about my friend Cassandra in our house a lot, because she just completely touched the lives of my kids. She was it takes a special kind of person to be a special education school teacher. And she was, that's what she retired doing. That was her love, is to be with kids. And I try to continue to talk about her, so the kids don't forget. We all of a sudden, what's great about Facebook is memories pop up, and then all of a sudden we'll smile again, and we'll remember those good times. But she always told me to breathe. That was her big thing, was just breathe. When you doubt, take a deep breath, close your eyes if you have to, and just breathe, and just remember the light. Don't remember the dark. Like you said, good versus evil is the same thing as light versus dark. And I sit back in days like this past weekend, when it was the 40th anniversary of our church, and I saw priests and all parishioners that were there when that church was built. And you guys know how much my church means to me. But I remember going back to a point in time where I didn't think I'd ever overcome loss. I don't think I was prepared to deal with things. But I know, like, the divorce of my family, that's a form of loss. And for kids, that's a huge loss, divorces. But now, I mean, that was in 1977. You know, my dad remarried in 79. But had that loss of the family not happened, had that loss of my parents' marriage not happened, I wouldn't have had a whole nother family, my stepmother's family. First of all, I wouldn't have had a second mom. I wouldn't have had a stepmother. Number two, I wouldn't have had her mother and father, which were another set of grandparents. I wouldn't have had her siblings, which are aunts and uncles, or and a whole set of cousins in Indiana. And let me tell you, I felt more love with that side of the family because they were the huggy kind of people. You know, the kind of people I'm talking about for all you guys listening, the people that just embrace you and they hold on and they don't let go. That's what I needed. I needed that growing up, and I got it from that side of the family. And had that divorce not happened, I wouldn't have had that. I wouldn't have known what it would have been, what it was like to be loved that deeply by aunts and uncles and things like that. So we just don't know. We don't have those reasons. And I go back to the church again for a second, because I sit back, and as I'm staring at the cross this weekend, I was reminded again how Mary just sat back and watched her son lay there on a cross, be hung on a cross, and be whipped and beat, you know, and the loss that she suffered. I'm sure, I mean, it's like one of the things I want to ask her, you know, when I go to heaven, I pray I do go, but I want to ask her, how did you sit back and watch? You know, I can't imagine watching my children. It hurts. It pains us to watch our children suffer. But when it comes to faith and the epitome of faith, she let him. She didn't save him. We talked about this in the very beginning. She sat back quietly and watched, because there were no words. She couldn't do anything. She couldn't control the situation, but she sat back and she just watched. And she trusted, and she had faith. And I want to be Mary. I want to be more like Mary, and I strive to be Mary. And how many of us out there need that? We need that someone to look up to. Don't look up to me. Don't look up to our leaders. Look up to a Mary, you know. And anyways, I just wanted to share that personally. So I don't know.
No, that's powerful. And I think that that's where the leaning into trust and leaning into faith are really essential. So when you were talking about like what to do, and sometimes we need to keep ourselves busy, and yet it's also the marriage or the balance of the doing and the being, right? I'm doing these things, but also who am I being? Am I allowing myself to feel these things, to process through them, right? Because if we don't process it, then we're dealing with it 5 years down the line, or you know, if we're not allowing ourselves to feel those feelings, then they can kind of, I think somebody, I don't remember who it was, said, I held on to blame internally for a while. Like if we are like allowing ourselves internally to bubble up, it's going to affect us internally, right? Biologically, physiologically. So it's allowing ourselves to get it out and to process through the emotions through the stages of grief, right? And so, you know, some people it takes quite a long time. So
I'm just reading some of the comments here. Terry said Mary could do it all because she had God's child. She had to trust that he had a reason to allow this. And then Mary said role models are so important in life. Yeah, it's true. You've got to have those role models. And you know, I think the big, huge takeaway for me, Kristen, in talking to you guys, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm not a therapist, but Kristen is. She's just shy of a PhD. She's going after it right now.
Working on her PhD.
But, you know, certainly a leader. We're both leaders in the community, and we both have, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, just so, people can learn and understand that it's okay. And I think we try to lead by example. And I just love Kristen. And this is the one thing, I mean, there's a lot that I'll remember from this conversation, and I always go back and I replay because I always learn something more. But I just still always remember just to be silent sometimes. And I know there are different people sometimes that come and sit next to me at church. I'm always having somebody that I know come up. A lot of times it's the same people, but I can just take my hand and I can just place it on the person next to me usually. And if this person ever comes on and sees this, she's going to know it's her. And there's this silence. But
just silent.
I mean, but both of us know, and she'll do the same thing. She'll just all of a sudden put her hand on my hand because she feels like, okay, I need it at that time, and she places it at the exact time. It's that physical touch you talked about because, it's so powerful, and we just know that the person gets us without saying a word. And people think silence is awkward. It's not awkward. Just sit there and just rest and just sit next to somebody on a couch or just hold their hand. And it's a beautiful thing. And God blessed us with that. He blessed us to be able to, silence was his first language. And being silent is when we hear the most. And we have to allow ourselves to be silent, to listen from within, to feel that touch of folks. And
So I want to add something there.
Okay.
So I know a lot of people are anti-meditation because they think that it's not of God, but I want to say something. Prayer is you talking to God, and meditation is you listening and being able to receive. So that's what I've always seen it as. So we need to be quiet in order to download what's being given. And I'm no different. I'm in my phone a lot and on social media a lot, but that quiet time is when sometimes the greatest ideas and the greatest blessings are downloaded, because we've taken the time to just be still and be quiet and listen. So, if this helps you, right? Absolutely, Terry. Meditating helps us hear God's answers. So when you're going through this process, allow yourself to hear, allow yourself to be still in the quiet and to hear what's being given to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot today. Guys, we're going to go back and we'll be posting, reading all your comments. We're trying to read it as we go here, but we just thought this topic was so important. Again, whether it's the loss of someone physical or it's the loss of something, the loss of food, the stages of grief are still the same. You're still going to have to accept that, accept the feelings and fill up the void with something good. Maybe the void from the food, that loss is, your physical exercise. How do you grow from that loss? What do you learn from it? Replace those negative feelings with positive ones. Feel liberated enough to move forward, listen, and learn to become more emotionally stable. Don't have those ups and downs. Don't go through those binges. Recognize that. And then start evaluating your faith. Whatever faith is, or that higher power for you guys, but just, what's your outlook going to look like? How do you be proactive and be positive, and moving forward, and maybe be that person for someone else who is suffering, because you too have suffered. So, thank you, Kristen, for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me
on. Just to be online and just to continue to keep giving back to the community. And guys, you will be seeing Kristen and I soon. I'm getting ready to travel for another week or so, but then we'll be back. And then, if you want to hear another topic from Kristen and I, just put it in the notes section, what you want to hear us talk about next, and we'll put something together. Yeah. All right, guys, have an amazing week. See ya.
Bye.